Welcome, mere mortalites, to another round of the conversations. Today, I have Jordan Michaelides. He's the co-founder of Neuralle Digital Agency, head of partnerships at CoinJar, podcaster, and aspiring voice actor? Question mark.
I get that a lot. I don't know why. Do I have an okay voice?
I think it was because, I asked that one in particular because I listened to a couple of your episodes where, particularly one of your sum up ones where you were doing a lot of crazy voices and that. And then recently you were chatting to, is it Michael Cusack who invented, oh no, sorry, not recently, but recently for me. And yeah, you were talking about how you appeared on I can't remember what it was. I missed it in the actual episode and forgot to write it down, but you did some voice acting somewhere.
So that's funny. It's so Stepmates, good friends of ours, Mark and Seb. They have a podcast, Stepmates podcast, but they really made themselves from selling cartoons, and they sold a show to Channel 7. Yep. And I was like, fuck yeah, this is my chance, to become a credited voice actor. And they got me in. I was doing like a little old lady. Actually, not a little old lady, an old wog lady. So like a yaya or nonna. Yeah. And I don't think I made the cut, which was hilarious. Like they ended up using the voice. Who was it? Mark ended up doing most of the voices actually, bar one or two. He pretty much did every single voice on that show, which I find really funny. But I got a credit. I still got a credit. Nice. Like with thanks to blah, 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 myself, Lauren, and a few others who participated. So it was sort of like, we got a participation prize, which is nice.
Yeah, for sure. Take it.
Yeah.
Well, obviously we connected with the podcasting. As you have in the background there, are the host of the Uncommon podcast, and I guess that was birthed from Neuralle, right? Because you had Neuralle, the agency, before the podcast.
It's actually the other way around. So the way it started was, God, when was it? It must have been 2017.
I had this. Feb 2017 was when you started.
Was it? Okay, yeah. About that. So started recording that like December or maybe November. We geared up to get 8 episodes. And basically I decided at the time I was really bored of my job, classic corporate job. And I just wanted something different to do. I had a blog, I was posting stuff, but in reality, like you would get 200 people that would view a blog post. I was putting in all this effort every week. Lauren, I don't know why, as with most things, I just pulled her into doing it. That's my wife, by the way, for those who don't know, but pulled her in. She's helping me with this blog. And I was just like, maybe I should, it's a classic case. Tim Ferriss started a podcast. Hey, maybe I should start a podcast. So we did that. And it sort of just kicked off from there. And then about a year later, after so many people were asking us, hey, how do you make this stuff? I just started saying, look, we'll do it for you and mark it up by X%. And it sort of just, evolved from there. The first year of that was really just podcast only. Then we started doing everything digital. Then we started specializing, and sort of we're here today where it's sort of a real specialization around social and talent. So yeah, the podcast came first, actually.
Yeah, okay, there you go. See, this is where doing bloody too much research can bite you in the ass, because I was looking on LinkedIn. I'm pretty sure on LinkedIn it says Neuralle started in 2016. So I was like, oh, okay, there's that. There's also, I guess, what you're using post rolls or something for some of the earlier episodes talking about Neuralle. So I was like, oh, okay, I guess Neuralle was there, and damn it.
Yeah, no, it's all good.
So yeah, you just got inspired by other people doing podcasts. Was there anything about the medium itself that really drew you in?
I guess my viewpoint was like at the time, okay, I like to talk. So there was that. Now that's not a reason to go start a podcast. Like as you learn when you first start this thing off, like there's a particular skill set in talking, but also listening, which is sort of the thing that I learned in the first 50 episodes more than anything, is how to shut the fuck up. So I think at the time I was just thinking, look, it's a better way for me. I was like a salesperson or a sort of account manager role. And my view was like, okay, this will just make me better at listening to people because I like to talk, but maybe I should learn to listen more. So that was the thing that pulled me in more than anything. And it just made me better overall as a person, I think. And naturally, it's a lot easier to say to someone, hey, do you want to do a podcast versus, hey, do you want to grab a coffee? And I quickly learned at least that just naturally you picked up these relationships that existed from doing the podcast, from getting better at it. They would introduce you. And then you get to sort of times like now where previous guests, when they introduce you to someone, they say, he's the most connected guy I know. And I don't really look at it like that. But I guess when you look at it from an outsider's point of view, it's just one of those natural things that you naturally build. So yeah, it's been a good outcome as opposed to just asking people, hey, do you want to grab a coffee?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, much easier, and because I guess there is some benefit for them as well, and it just feels more structured as well. Like if someone tells me, like, do you want to grab a coffee? Not that anyone does, because I don't drink coffee at all. So, but if they were to ask, it would sort of be like, okay, well, what's the purpose behind it as well? Like,
what's the ulterior
and you're not sure
motive?
what you're going to get from it. Is it going to be a deep conversation, or are you going to talk about dogs and stuff all day?
Yeah, doing some sort of thing like a podcast and media for them, like, again, it makes it gives them an incentive, and it almost seems altruistic. Like, because depending on how big your podcast is, ours isn't massive in comparison to, your Joe Rogans of the world or anything like that. And we don't make direct money from it, but I guess people look at it and go, oh, okay, he's putting in this thing and he's doing something, he's documenting something that I wouldn't ordinarily get. So it's a fair trade, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think it's almost easier to say no as well, because, a podcast can be a big deal, especially for someone who's not, never particularly done it before. So you can be like, check it out. You can sort of know what to expect because you can check out some of the previous episodes. Like, oh, okay, I see how Jordan, runs his show.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Like we've definitely had people, like, I guess that's one of the interesting things that people don't see is like, and I don't know if you have it as well. You pitch all these people for podcasts and people think, oh, cool, they're getting this person one, and they get these 10 other people. But the reality is, like, it's a 50-50 hit still to this day with people saying yes or no. There's a lot of prominent people that just say no because either they don't want to be in the limelight due to the nature of their job or their position in life, or they just look at it and go, oh, this isn't worth it. Like, we're not at that 60 minutes level or anything like that. And that's the end goal, is to get to that level where people just have to say yes.
Yeah. A bit different for us because, well, Mere Mortals is mostly one, and I, we've done, I think it's like 200 and something episodes together, and actually it'd be more than that. Let's just say 250, and there's maybe like 50 of the conversations. So these sorts of things are almost like the side one, and it's basically I've already known the person or already sort of gotten to the point where I know them enough that it's probably going to be a yes. So for me, it'd be like a 90-95% hit rate in terms of asking.
Yeah, that's been an interesting thing for me in the last couple of weeks, because with the talent we have on our roster, we've been pitching shows. So, like, there's a big movement at the moment to buy shows from different podcast networks. And it's always intriguing to see, like, what's the thing that's going to give you cut through? What's the hook on your show? Because, like, a lot of people, I don't know about you probably get it. People say, hey, should I start a podcast? How could I start a podcast? And they just go and do, an interview show. And just doing an interview show these days doesn't cut it. Like, maybe 3 years ago, sure. But, like, if anyone can do an interview show, unless you've got some massive audience with 1 million people, that's been really interesting for me over the last few months.
Yeah. The how you can make it unique and something special is definitely something you need to work on. And I would probably argue you're not going to find it straight away. It's almost like you need to start the podcast, do it for a while, and then realize, like, oh, this is no different from anything else. How can I make this a bit different?
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that.
So speaking of that, yours is difficult to pin down like us, because if I had to say, what are the topics that Jordan covers, I'd be like, just name a topic, and he'll pretty much have that on. So I guess how do you go about guest selection? Your podcast is called Uncommon, so you're looking for uncommon people. What are the qualities, characteristics that jump out at you to make you want to get someone on?
Well, I guess it comes down to the segment that we focus on. I mean, when we initially, like when podcasts first started or when we first started doing it, you had all these whack segments. Like you had business, but then beneath business, you'd have like self-improvement, finance, and investing. And it didn't really quite fit. And for me at the time, I was sort of like, I saw myself as someone, I just sort of went based on what I was interested in. So I knew I was going to interview people. I knew that my intrigue was always around business media marketing. And so I basically took guests in that direction. Now, it didn't mean that they had to exclusively be in that industry, but I always try and make sure that there's some sort of element of business or media or marketing within or strategy within it, if that makes sense. So, we've had guests where we've talked about psychedelics. We've had guests. I had one guy on the other week. His episode was published this week, Matt versus Japan, and he is like a YouTuber known for his specialization in Japanese culture and language. But the thing that intrigued me about him was his business, which is all about teaching Japanese, because it's quite a new transformative business that is competing with Duolingo. So, I always take that, when we get into the in-depth stuff, that's the way that I always look at it. I also realized that, growing up, the people that I liked to watch as interviewers, because I like conversation. I'd always been intrigued by those in-depth conversations, particularly at dinner tables in a Greek family where things go hush and quiet. I liked that. And so I was drawn into shows like Parkinson. What's his name in?
I think you always said Charlie Rose, right?
Yeah, Charlie Rose, until he became a serial pest. I don't know if anyone knows the backstory of that, but the guy just like got in trouble for, walking around in his change room nude and like hitting on female producers, and he completely vanished after 2018 or 19, but he was like a hero to me. Some of his interviews are amazing. Who's the other old bloke, the old Jewish bloke who was based in Miami, who passed away recently? Old Jewish interviewer.
I was going to say Larry King. Or...
Yeah, it was Larry King.
Yeah.
Sorry, I always blank on his name, but Larry King was another one because he would just sit down there. I love the set. Is always like hush, and he would just ask the question and just shut up. And that's the stuff that I like. So I would try and pepper that timeline sort of biographic component onto it, but always take a sort of business media marketing strategy type view on the in-depth stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no. So how would that person, get on your radar in the first place? So Matt versus Japan, for example, I've watched him a couple of other places because I'm real into language learning, and I haven't even thought about the marketing aspect. I didn't even know he had a business, to be honest. So that sort of makes sense why you would get someone like him. But how would he pop up onto your radar, for example?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I guess there's three of us doing it. So there's myself as the host, Lauren, my wife, as the executive producer, and Jacob, our producer. So if someone comes up, we generally mention it when we're talking about guests. Now, we're often booked ahead up until like a month or two ahead. So I think for the moment, we're booked to November, December-ish. What I'm looking for, we actually had this discussion internally, was people who can help us acquire more of an audience, but also be someone that we're genuinely interested in. Like, I can't do interviews that I'm not interested in. That being said, I have done interviews where I've gone, why the fuck did we invite this person on? And then we get into it, and I realize it was like one of the best episodes we've done in the space of the last 6 months. So, so long as the three of us agree that this person is a leader in their field or interesting within their field, maybe they're a challenger, then we start to dig into that. And then we start to look at things like on Google Trends, is their name appearing? Are they prominent on social media? Will they work with us to promote it? And what angle can we take? And then we decide, yes, we're going to pitch this person. And then we pitch people over, we pitch people regularly, to be honest. Like sometimes I'll just be on social media and go, okay, I find this person interesting, so let's do this interview. sometimes I'll pitch them, Jacob will pitch them, Lauren will pitch them. It really depends. But, we've built such a momentum now that we get requests all the time that we say no to. So we're in a privileged position now in comparison to 3 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. I love how structured that is compared to my system, which is generally.
Really?
That person. That could be fun. Like, just send a message.
Is that? Do you guys you and Juan, does any one person pitch for episodes, or do you just go, hey man, what do you reckon? Like this guy.
No. He'll randomly come up with a person from the Bitcoin industry here in Brisbane that I'd never heard of before. Like I sort of, it's just like I trust him, he trusts me. So if he finds him interesting, I'll probably find him interesting, and that's cool enough. Like that's good enough for the podcast.
Okay, that's a good point.
Yeah. You've talked about media trained people as well. So you would get a fair bunch of them, obviously with the marketing and whatnot. What do you do to try and break them out when you do notice they're going into like the spiel, which can be unintentional as well? I've noticed this a couple of times where, someone's asked me my backstory on a podcast when I'm appearing on one of theirs. And it's like, once you do it 5 times, you sort of you're trying to find new ways to tell your own story again. So it's not even necessarily like them intentionally being obfuscating or whatever. But do you have any tips, tricks to try and break them out of that when you see it happen?
It's a hard one. Like, you're definitely right. You probably picked up on it in episodes. It comes down to who the person is and the context within their business or their life. So if they don't own everything they do, it's going to be very hard for you to break through the ice. And, I have this doing interviews for CoinJar. There's just certain things that you can't have the confidence in saying because you're not an owner of the business, or you don't have the remit to say something. And so you are putting yourself at risk, at great personal risk. Whereas if it's my own stuff, I can speak, like I have to withhold myself from saying too much because I'm a very honest and open person. And it depends on the context, again, of course. But when they get into those scenarios, let's say they're a founder, co-founder, CEO, whatever, the best thing I can do is just be vulnerable. That's the biggest thing I learned from Tim Ferriss. So vulnerability can come in a few different ways. It can be icebreakers to begin with, something that'll make them laugh, that makes them realize, this isn't an ordinary interview. It could be the fact that we're being more conversational. So a lot of times you listen to podcasts and people will do an interview, they'll ask a question, the person will answer, and they're like, okay, cool, great. And then they just go on to the next question. They don't let the conversation flow. That is often an indirect signal that they can layer or lower their guard down. They don't have to hold themselves in preparation for the next question. And it feels like it flows naturally. So that's a big indirect thing as well. And then sometimes vulnerability is like, it's as simple as swearing or, offering something personal that's happened in my life that would be a little bit unusual to give someone that you've just first met, like a story about your own childhood or experience where you were embarrassed or something like that. So those are sort of 3 or 4 things that I try to utilize when interviewing people. Yeah.
Okay. How much of it would be in the setup for the podcast as well? Would you say because you do extensive research and notes,
I mean, it's all in that. It's mainly in that, but again, there's little cues like swearing. You don't really need to do research for. Telling stories about yourself, you don't need to do research for. So yeah, it just really depends on the individual, and you've got to sort of just, I don't know, you have to see what's going on in that time when you're doing that interview as well. And I mean, there's certain things that don't make it easy. Like when you're doing Zoom interviews, it's harder because there's delays. If you do an interview, sometimes you can sort of see it behind us. People will come in and sit in, but there's almost a couple of meters between where the cameras are set up and where we're actually sitting. So if they bring along like a helper, sometimes that's like, again, another thing that stuff things up. So I always try and make sure the room is empty bar Jacob being there. And that's probably the biggest thing I'm excited about the new production room is that when we have that, those marketing people, EAs, etc., they can't be in on the room at the same time. It's going to be pretty clear that they're just going to sit out on the couch outside in the waiting room.
So they physically can't be in there.
Exactly, because it just applies certain thing. It just implies a pressure in the room that you may not realize, but is there in some form.
Yeah.
So you just want to, reduce that base layer of pressure, so to speak.
For sure. And then it, gets rid of the need for you to have a potentially awkward conversation if it's like, hey, do you mind waiting outside, et cetera, as well. So yeah.
Exactly. And you don't have to like feel like because another thing that happens when other people in the room is like you have this feeling of like you need to look and address that individual, which breaks this conversation to make the person feel aware that there are other people around them. So yeah, it's a lot about body language as well, now that I think about it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I was going to save this for later, but we're already on the topic. So how do you view communication, I guess, differently than the rest of us? Because you're so into the marketing world, and that is what communication is, I guess, and marketing is communication. And when I mean that, so like, if you read a book like Influence by Robert Cialdini, you'll really start to notice like, okay, these people are doing this with their body language, and it's influencing, well, this is how you can influence people this way. So you sort of get to like step behind the scenes. With all your years in marketing, do you view communication differently, i.e. in the street when you're speaking with people, on billboards and stuff like that? Do you sort of see behind the layering that's there, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that like you've just got to be aware of. I think one of the best things you can read is by Kahneman and Tversky around cognitive biases. And one of the best ways to get in that is to actually read the bio that was recently written about them, and it gives you the context. That being said, like at the end of the day, we're all just human. So oftentimes you're recognizing these things after the fact and after the conversation. To be aware in that conversation sometimes is very hard, but there's no doubt, like when you're communicating with people, there are different layers to it. There's written word, spoken word, body language, print, and video, and they all carry different things. And I guess the common thing that comes back to it is, how is it perceived by that person within their brain? And does one medium in particular give you greater insight than most? And, you could argue very easily that it's a lot easier, let's just say from a sales or marketing perspective, to convince someone who is receptive in person when they're relaxed than it is through a piece of written word that just gets pushed to them on a billboard or in a letter or something like that. If you have an interpersonal relationship with that person in any way, whether an acquaintance or a friend, it's a lot easier to convince that person in person than all these other formats. And so you've got to think about how all these different things change the way that people perceive you or your brand in particular. And then when you look at the interpersonal stuff, it's all about what are the subconscious biases that are happening here? What's the body language? Are they scratching their face? Are they covering their mouth? Are they looking away? All that stuff like means something. And it's very interesting because, when we do interviews, I reckon 10% of the audience interviewees, I notice while they may be leaders in a certain field, they're clearly introverts. There's little cues, like they get like a sort of not a red rash, but like they get really red on their neck or sort of on their cheeks. And you can see it in their hands as well. So there's little things like that for sure that I'm ultra aware of.
Yeah. And it's, I guess, picking which ones are useful and which aren't. I think I remember reading another book on Joe Navarro, How Everybody Talks, and with the body part, capitalize, which is all about, he was an FBI investigator, I believe. And so he was just saying a bunch of the stuff that he'd learned over the years, interviewing suspects and figuring out what's correct and what's not. And have you read that book out of interest?
No, I've been looking at it actually. Now that you mention it, there's another guy. What's that service where Masterclass, that's it. And this guy is, I can't remember his name. It's a different dude. Masterclass FBI negotiator, and he covers similar stuff. Chris Voss. That's it.
Yeah,
he's that well-known dude now around that topic. But yeah, I've been meaning to get into that book. I haven't read it, so I'd be keen to hear like what you think about it.
Yeah, well, I suppose the most interesting thing is he says, there's all these cues you can look out for. It's like you were saying, people looking left and right, people taking a lot of time to think on things. There's all sorts of stuff related to the hand. So, if you're confident, you'll steeple your hands. If you're unconfident, they'll usually be down, sort of towards the crutch area and things like that, or by your side or behind your own person, things like that. And he says, it's not really any of them in particular. You can't just look at one thing and say, oh, this person's lying, or this person's uncomfortable, this person's, doing whatever. It's more the combination of multiples of them. And then, it sort of has a multiplying effect, because that could just be one person, they have a really itchy nose that day, and so they're itching their face a lot.
Yeah, no, one of my favorite things, people will think I'm so weird because of the stuff that I watch, but there's so many like random YouTube channels and videos that I look at that cover all these sorts of topics. But there's one on YouTube called Body Language Ghost, and I think it's like they're mirroring or copying what this lady's saying on Facebook. She must have like a Facebook profile. And it's really interesting. And, she covers exactly what you say. Like, you've got all these cues. The biggest thing is cues of what people are doing. So here's a cue, there's a cue. If I look at the entirety, you would look at it like a scorecard of this interview, all these cues combined. I think this person's probably lying, but I can't, you can never be fully sure, if that makes sense. So, these things just inform you generally and allow you to prod around and ask more questions.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of lying, so one of my other questions was, you've spent a bit of time in the crypto industry now, what with being in CoinJar and whatnot. There's one that's really becoming front and center to me, which is what would be like the long-term effects of trust declining. So what I really see with crypto is, don't trust, verify. That sort of message gets repeated all the time. It's, one of the core tenets of it. And it makes me think, what could happen to the world if we do get to the point where everything has to be verified and there is sort of like no trust. And obviously that's a bit of an exaggeration, but if everyone went from 80% trusting to 70% trusting, what would you sort of expect to see from the world if that happened?
Well, it's a good thing. I mean, it comes down, I don't have any principles for this, but I'm starting to think more about it because, on the talent side of our business, we have an example recently where a large brand, they reached out and they said, hey, we want to do a campaign with these 5 people. I said, okay, great. What's the deliverables? Okay, thank you. Here's a quote. This is what they're worth. They come back to me and they say, we spoke to HQ, which is always a fucking great one. This is what we can afford, or this is the budget that we think they're worth. If you do this campaign with us, I'm sure there'll be opportunities to do that in future. Now, for me, I just said to the brand, look, this is not how you build trust. You don't go to someone, hey, look, if you give this job to me, I guarantee you there'll be jobs down the line. If you give this job to me, at this discount, I guarantee you there'll be jobs down the line. They're clearly not telling the truth. If there was more jobs down the line, as I said to them, you would just pay what they're worth, first of all, come back after that, and then renegotiate for more work in a larger package. That would make sense to me to build trust. I don't know you. I don't have any relationship with you. I've never worked with you. So when I think about it in that micro situation, I totally get why cryptocurrency exists, because people are not truthful, or they're not completely truthful, because we're all playing this game theory around, particularly in business. It's more so on the business side of things and financial transactions. Oftentimes you're trying to get the upper hand on someone, I don't think that's a great way of approaching business. I'm often very honest and just deal my cards by withholding some things that I want to keep in the long term. But generally, I'm pretty honest, and it gets deals done quicker. It builds trust, and then you become the person that people come back to. Now, if you remove commerce and finance, when you look at government and authority, I mean, the reason why trust is less there today as it was is because of things that have financially happened over the last few decades. So I think largely it will sort itself out. I mean, this is just a natural human problem that has always existed. And I think things like cryptocurrencies or blockchains in particular really help us make everyday life just easier. I mean, when you think about it, like, how do we all just sit? Do you ever just walk around and go like, how do we all just agree and trust that this is like normal? Like, why doesn't someone just go up and just beat the shit out of that person and steal their stuff? Like, that is decades of trust built up through institutions, but also systems and processes that exist from institutions, i.e. the law, that makes it easier for us to exist. And, you know, you go to places like Afghanistan with its recent collapse. I mean, when the rule of law isn't what it used to be, things fall down and people die. So I think institutions like cryptocurrency, whether they're centralized, decentralized, help with that. People are going to lose trust in things over time because, corruption, whatever it may be. And then we need something to replace it to make life that little bit easier again.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of things that come from that. One was me thinking one of the reasons you can, there's been maybe a declining in trust in government is just with the technology. You know, you can see things. Back when there was the what's it called, the Holodome, where the Ukrainian peasants were starving under the Iron Curtain. You know, if everyone had phones back then, you know, you could just take the video from outside of the train, seeing
we'd know.
The piles of bodies massed up and whatnot. So that it was insane that they managed to, you know, hide for however many decades just how many people were dying there. You know, that's a lot harder now when you go to South America and, you know, everyone's got a phone even there, smartphones as well. So that's definitely one aspect of it. I like the sort of separating the money side as well, because I've heard some wacky things of like, you'll do smart contracts related to relationships. You know, we'll be together for this many years, or like we'll have our relationship set up this sort of way. And I was just like, no way, insane. This
is techno geeks thinking that a new technology gets applied everywhere in their life. And with any new technology, it's just as simple as like, okay, does this make my life easier and quicker? Yes. Okay, then I'm going to use it. No, I'm not going to fucking bother. Like, the general punter does not give a shit. And it needs to be something that is really easy. Who in their right mind is honestly going to enter a smart contract with all these permutations? Like, humans don't work like that. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
I just touched on something you mentioned earlier, because I just recently read a book it was about disinformation, and it covered that element of Ukraine. And I think you're 100% right. Like, there's no way that people can get away with shit today than that they used to. Like, the thing about Ukraine and even the Holocaust, like, no one knew until the war was basically at its end. There were stories, but how do you trust and verify those stories? It's just hearsay. So it wasn't until they literally got into the concentration camps and realized, okay, shit, this is happening. And, you know, with Ukraine in particular, journalists would be invited over by the USSR to the Ukraine to say, hey, look how wonderful everything is. They never ever got to see what was really happening, but they would see certain things that would make them question what they were seeing. So I think you're 100% on the mark with that, is that technology is the great equalizer, and it makes things a lot easier.
Yeah. I know you've read the Gulag Archipelago. There's one scene where he goes into the which of the many scenes, but he's in prison, and there's a story of someone else recollecting when they were in prison, and one of the great Soviet writers comes in, sort of sees this stuff, and it's really just showing like, hey, they're getting like the the censored version, I guess. And then it's like, it's just when it's like 5 layers deep, there's no way the average person's going to be able to know like, oh, this has this influence on this person, so he's going to influence this guy this way. And then it's like, yeah.
Exactly. I mean, that I thoroughly recommend anyone read it, because like,
did you read the full 3 volumes or the abridged?
No, I didn't realize there was like volumes of it. I just read whatever the standard book is. I think it's $40 on Amazon or $20 on Amazon. It must be the abridged version.
Yeah.
But it's wild, man. Like, that book actually got me into a book called The Party, which is about the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, it's really interesting. I'm fascinated by it. I'm like Jordan Peterson. I'm now fascinated by that sort of real, like Soviet era art
of that.
Of The Party. The Party is, it's hard to come across. Like Richard McGregor, he works at ANU, so he's sort of like an ANU policy guy.
Yeah.
So I think he works for ANU and ASPI. So, be wary that this guy will clearly be like a Western military hawk, so he should be. I mean, that's his literal role, is for Australia's movement in the world, free and open movement. I mean, but it's just a fascinating book because you learn about things like they call it the red machine or something like that. So every major party official and every state-owned CEO in the country has a red phone that can be connected to directly by Xi Jinping or whoever is the secretary, the president of the Chinese Communist Party. And just little things like how, the army, all these other groups, they don't serve the government, they don't serve the people, they serve the party. And the party is like the thing that's written into the constitution, not the nation. So it's super interesting. Super interesting.
Yeah. All right. I'll have to see if I can get that. I love. I used to be so strict with the books I read. I think I heard you saying somewhere that you read about one book every 2 weeks, something like that.
Yeah, depends on like what's going on in my life. To be honest, like at the moment, I've been very slow. I reckon I'm reading one a month, and I just bought a whole stack, and they're sitting on my bedside table. But yeah, I'll probably get through them in a year. But I've gotten to the point now where I've read so many books that like I'm very particular about the book. Like I might have a list, but I go through the list and I say, what am I actually going to learn from this thing? I read the contents, I read an excerpt. I spend almost like 2 to 4 hours just on the initial order that I do and cull the list down, because you get to a point, it's just like, okay, I've read this shit before. Like, I understand this stuff. I've made notes on it. I don't need to reread this stuff. I need to expand my knowledge in this area. So, I'm a lot more selective now when it comes to books.
That's funny. I used to be selective, and then I started doing the Mere Mortals book reviews channel, and I was reading 2 a week and reviewing 2 a week. And it got to the point where I was like, oh, I don't really need to be that picky anymore because I'm spending so much time reading these things. Like, it doesn't matter if a slightly shit one gets in because it'll be gone within the week,
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting.
I wanted to read out a quote that I got from one of your other podcasts and just see if you could expand on that a bit. And so you said, fraudsters are very, very smart and are playing with a lot of the aspects that make us human. So this is relating to, I think it was something to do with the cryptocurrencies and the frauds that are going on there. I just wanted to get into that. Like, what in particular do you think they're playing with when we're looking at the human condition, I guess?
I'm not too specialist in my knowledge of this, but I'll give you an example. Like, most issues that exist, like when I look at crypto, just having this knowledge in the cryptocurrency space, people's problems don't come from the technology. It comes from how they use the technology and what makes them human. So, in the breaking someone's password is very, very hard to do. Just from a pure maths perspective, if you've got a chain of your password, let's say it's 2 or 3 words, what you have to do is you have to multiply how many letters there are in the alphabet by how many different variations of letter there are in the syntax of your word. So if it's 24, you got to multiply all those by 24 and you get to the square root, and the number becomes so exponential that unless you have a supercomputer, it's very hard to crack someone's password. Now, you can do things where you guide, if you look at things like Enigma, they guided the Enigma machine to a specific word that they knew was used in every single syntax or group of words pushed out in the Enigma system by the Nazis during the war. So if a hacker knows a certain word, i.e. like they know something about you, where you live, your partner's name, etc., that can give them something and reduce that impact. But it's still only going to, even if it's a billion different variations and it's halved, it's still very, very hard. It takes 300 years or some shit like that to crack a password. Now, the issue exists when you get humans involved, because humans are dumb. And we're all largely unaware about how dumb we really are. Like, that is the only thing that I know, is that I'm an idiot. And I need to be constantly working against that. So, if I log into a banking system and the banking system relies on just a password, and someone can be basically recording my screen and they can find it that way, because I, for some stupid reason, saw a Nigerian prince send me a link on Google and it says, hey, you've won $2,000 or $2 million. And I click on the link and I download a file. And then all of a sudden that file is on my computer and I didn't even because it did nothing. It just downloaded the file and then nothing when I opened it. Oh, that's weird. This is just a blank file. Well, there's a piece of script on that file, and that piece of script is now looking at everything you do on your keyboard. So when you're on a certain IP address, they can see what you're doing on your keyboard. They don't have to record your screen. That would put too much emphasis on the CPU on the system. They can just look at what you're inputting on your keyboard, and then they know your password. Or, someone tells you, hey, I've got this guaranteed return thing. They run you an ad, I guarantee you'll make 2% a day in interest on this product. You just have to send me $1,500 down. Oh, great idea. I'm going to go do that. And so they just send the money away, and then they're surprised that the person, there's no contract, there's no agreement. It's not a registered business with ASIC. And so all of a sudden they've lost $1,500. That's the thing that we're constantly fighting against. It's not the technology, it's the people. And so then you get technology implements that help us stop that, like two-factor authentication. That's why all banks, all financial institutions basically have 2FA. If you have to send money to a first-time payee, if you're transferring money that's above a certain amount, if you're doing an activity like on a credit card that's above your average amount, you're going to get a code, or you're going to get a call, an automated call from the fraud team. So that's what people are constantly fighting against. It's always going to be an issue because we're human and we want to think the best of people. And so, and we're always looking for money and more resources. So, we're resource hungry beings. Therefore, we're not going to think about that sort of stuff. So little things like 2FA, there's a new thing called 3FA, which is starting to come out. I don't particularly understand it, so don't ask me. But
yeah, I was going to say, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, apparently it's like, apart from getting a message or an email verification, you also have to do like a Face ID type thing on your phone on top of that code. So yeah, it's just, this is why if anyone's intrigued in tech, I always say, hey man, you should look at like cyber, because cybersecurity is always going to be an area. And as digital becomes more and more part of our life, it's always going to be an area that there's work. So yeah, it's just, I don't know. I can't tell you. It's always going to be a problem that exists.
Yeah. I'm really intrigued as well on your thoughts on, you've been pretty, I suppose, vocal about having regulation a bit in the crypto industry as well. How do you sort of, mar that up with the stated aims of things like Bitcoin, which is, really trying to avoid regulation?
Yeah. Look, there's just a problem. This is a more specific to the finance industry problem. So when you're in the finance industry, if you run a business in a certain area, you have to have a license. What does that license do? It basically checks that, one, the directors aren't dodgy individuals. Now, ASIC can already do that stuff anyway. They can investigate you. They can go through what people used to know it as FOSS. is now like, I can't remember the name, but the financial ombudsman basically can run an investigation on your business. But when you have a license, there's a bigger chunk of change at risk. So you have an individual that is registered as the responsible manager, just like you do with gambling. So you have to have a person that is dedicated and just deals with compliance and responds to the regulator as necessary. Now, what exists in the financial industry for depositing products, for FX, for CFDs, derivatives, bonds, stocks, you've got to have a license, and that license is pretty onerous. So not anyone in their backyard can start a business. In crypto land, it's not as easy as just starting a business. You've still got to be registered with AusTrack and do KYC, and to be registered with AusTrack gives you the ability to operate in the business, but that isn't particularly hard. So my viewpoint on the industry is it needs a license, because there are people in the last year, at least in the last couple of years, that have run businesses that have scammed people that ordinarily, if they were registered with ASIC, would be audited annually, would be checked regularly, background checks. They would have to be reporting, like doing a compliance report to ASIC every year. And I just think if there was a license in the business, things like this wouldn't happen, essentially.
Yeah. And were those sort of, I guess, like getting scammed and whatnot, is that more hitting the individual person or like the business type space? So
it's hurting individuals more than anything. Yeah. Because like I said, most people are naive. They trust someone. They watch someone on social media for years, and I trust this individual. And then it turns out, because unfortunately people are dodgy, like, this person screwed me for 10, 20 grand and I'm never getting this money back. So what can you do? What recourse have you got? Well, you can sue them, but then you're suing them in a state court. It's going to cost you a lot of money. Good luck. So I just think that if there was regulation at a licensing level, it would make it a lot better for individuals. And I know there's a lot of people in the business environment who operate businesses in this space that don't like that. But I just think it's like tough luck. This is part of being a grown-up adult. Like, this is part of running a business in this space. So we've just got to deal with it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that makes sense in some ways. Like, and it doesn't stop the individual being able to use crypto however they want. You can still send your money wherever you want, etc.
Yeah.
I guess it's when you just get large groups of people together doing things. That's where it can get iffy.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's when things get iffy that it's most needed. Like, it's never needed when things are fine and dandy, but in hindsight, it's something that people always talk about is like, okay, this should have existed in the industry. And the regulator, like, honestly, is always behind. Like, I was in the FX space. It was the same thing. There's the biggest ever insider trading event in the industry the year after I left it, which would have been like 2014. And ASIC at the time was still doling out FX licenses to businesses anyway. It wasn't until that event that they realized, okay, shit, we should probably do something, because all these people are getting defrauded, essentially. Yeah. So, yeah, it's a tough battle that will always exist, I think.
For sure. When did you, I think I've heard about Bitcoin back in, like, I don't know, 2012, 2013 or something like that. And then you actually joined CoinJar in 2017. Is that right?
When did I join CoinJar? It's 2018.
2018, yeah. I was going to say, did you actually get that job because you had Asher on the podcast?
No. Like, it's a good question. I knew Asher. So I'm trying to think back to that time. So 2017 is when I started the podcast. Do it for a year, after maybe even 9 months. After 9 months, we start doing project work for people, mainly on podcasts and video work. My wife at the time, she was my girlfriend at the time, now wife. She always worked in the industry. And so I realized, like, she's never going to earn over 70K a year just working for herself. Why don't we start a business?
That was doing graphic design, right?
Graphic design at PwC, yeah. So I thought, okay, let's start offering this. Let's get it to a certain point so she can leave her job. She left her job in probably late 2018 to do our stuff full time, which is super exciting. Before that, though, I was already done with my time at this company called IBISWorld. So 2017, I was at a company called IBISWorld. I was cooked. Like, I'd been there for 4 years. I was bored as shit. I could do my work in 2 hours in a day. And I was spending all my free time on the podcast and all this other stuff. So I hit up Asher because I've been investigating, crypto more, particularly like a style of investing called value investing in crypto. I had him on the podcast. He worked at IBISWorld and left like the week that I started. So we'd stayed in contact over the years. I just sent him this thesis and said, "Hey, what do you think about it?" He's like, "Oh, this is cool. I like what you're doing here. By the way, we're looking at starting a fund." So they're looking at starting an index fund for people investing in Bitcoin in particular. And he's like, "Have you ever considered, would you ever consider working with us?" So we got chatting, took a few months. And then by the end of December, like just before the Christmas break, I resigned and I started at CoinJar in February and helped them launch their fund. So that was sort of how I got into the industry. It worked for me because the role was not a full-time role. So it gave me time to continue expanding the business. And over time, it just worked out really well where I've been able to spend time on CoinJar and time on Neuralle, and neither impacts the other. And I can still get essentially a salary and do some interesting work because I'm genuinely intrigued by the crypto space. Now, at some time in the future, I can obviously see that ending, but for the time being, it works. Again, the biggest thing for me is that I just don't have to take a salary from the business, which goes straight back into growth. So it's exciting, and it allows me to keep my finger on the pulse. And it's now helped because for the talent side of things, like NFTs and all that is huge for talent. And we're starting to look at like how that affects them. And my insight into crypto has been invaluable to that.
Yeah, for sure. In the early years of it, and you were sort of explaining to people, and so I'm thinking more like, 2018 before, or was it 2017? Where was that the big spike? How did you get good at actually explaining what's going on with all this crypto stuff? Because like I'm into it now, and then there's right now I found the intersection between podcasting and crypto, and explaining it to other people is so hard. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just going at it, trying my best. Do you have any tips for how you've managed to I suppose get better at doing that?
Like describe what crypto is,
or that, and then also why you're interested in it, I suppose. Like those 2 points.
I mean, crypto to me is blockchain in particular, and crypto is the greatest. Like I look at it and I go, this is like the free market on steroids. Like it is completely open slather. People can do whatever they want, and there's very little controls. And I think that's the thing as a natural skeptic, as someone who is aligned towards liberty and freedom and the ability to decide what you want to do with limited rules placed upon it. I think that's what initially excited me to the space. Now, when I explain to people what cryptocurrency is, I just clearly say these are decentralized assets, not controlled by any, central bank. So we've got a system that is essentially decentralized monetary policy, completely dictated by a market unto its own. Now, that's not to say that it's not affected by capital markets, because, if the government prints money and someone gets more money and they put it into crypto, they're buying more crypto, and that has a short-term effect. But at the end of the day, it allows people to make decisions completely away from any government or any business controlling them. How you use that as an investor is complicated. It depends on what you're doing. We get different types of people at CoinJar. They could be institutions that want to allow people to merely exchange currencies. So you get stable coins that are used for people to exchange goods and services. You get Bitcoin for people who want to invest in essentially digital gold. And so those sorts of people, you start to speak to them and say, okay, look, for a risk reward basis, when you look at a portfolio, everyone talks about breaking apart your portfolio into different areas, if you allocate 1 to 2 to 5% of your portfolio, the risk reward profile is quite significant. For every dollar you put down, even if you just dollar cost average over the years in cryptocurrency, your returns for every dollar are like 1,000% or something like that. So why wouldn't you consider this? If it's only 2 to 5% of your portfolio, isn't the risk to the reward amazing when you compare it to the other assets that you have? Like, the potential of this thing is huge. So that's how people look at it, and that's how they go about investing in it. And that's what I do. Like, I have 2 to 5% of our portfolio at any one time in crypto. And then what actually happens when you get these major boosts, I have to liquidate a component of it because, I go, okay, I don't want to be too overweighted to crypto and realize that, there's boom periods that are going to happen. So we should take some profits and then reinvest that somewhere into something physical, maybe, like I said to you off air, maybe an office or property or in a business or in our business, whatever it may be. So it's just part of your general view of investing your money, I think.
Yeah. Juan's been having this problem because he invested in, he bought 2 of Gary V's NFTs, the 2 V friends.
The V friends.
And he bought, sort of rarish ones. And his percentage of net worth in that has just dramatically changed.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that. Some of them are like selling at Sotheby's for like 100K.
Yeah.
So it's pretty wild.
Yeah. There's insane stuff. It's fun as well. Like that's one of the things that drew me in is and it's scary as well because I generally, my general principle is that money shouldn't be fun. Like if I'm doing things well, it should be really boring, routine, not fun. But yeah, this stuff is kind of fun.
Yeah, I think people get sucked into stuff. I definitely agree with that. I definitely agree. People get sucked in and they've got to be wary of like their monkey brain jumping in to start betting on and flipping on coins, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, that's almost what gambling is, right? It's just that's a way of making money fun, and that generally isn't a good strategy. Unless you have some real insider knowledge.
You need to remove the emotion, without a doubt.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to get onto a couple more of the personal questions now. And to start off with this, I want to ask, how do you choose your personal questions? Because like I said, I've been doing a fair bit of listening to your podcast over the past 2 weeks, 3 weeks in anticipation. I've seen how they've changed since you first started as well. So how do you choose them, and what has changed with them when you're asking your guests?
Well, how would you define personal questions?
Let's just say I should say your rapid fire questions at the end.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Honestly, mate, we just collect questions and then we ask the guests what they prefer. And sometimes we just do it because I know the guests will be chilled about it. But
okay, so you give them these questions beforehand.
Yeah, it's one of the few things we give them apart from like topics we'll cover.
Gotcha.
But yeah, there's some stuff that I come back to regularly, like morning, evening routine is always interesting. What people are watching, billboards that they would consider putting up anywhere, and what would it say on it? What's another one? What's been in their fridge during lockdown?
Yeah, there's heaps. First memory. That I always find that one quite interesting.
Yeah. So that's more in like the, when you think about the way that we interview and make it biographical, I always try and get into their early life to build that vulnerability at the start. So I always ask things like, early memory, like what's their inception memory, lessons from parents, things that they, think about growing up, like any established memories in their life. That stuff is always really good for that. So, that's the main reason why I structure that at the start, because again, like you can get a lot of people saying a lot of things from that.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned you had so there's Neuralle, CoinJar. I think you just started Aimco Marketing Council. You joined that as well.
Yeah, so I'm on the working committee for 2 groups. So it is Best Practice and the Talent Management Group. And the main thing of that is like, you catch up every month, you pay to be part of this organization, and starts to define what are some of the regulations in the industry. That was the intrigue for me more than anything. The best practice group is interesting. There's a lot of people on it with various opinions. So yeah, I quite like it. It's cool to be part of something in the industry, and you can sort of see in years to come, like I'd love to aim for a go at the chairmanship eventually. I think that's something I've learned from my dad. Like, he got really involved. He was a printer. He got really involved in the industry. And you just build a name for yourself by putting hours into stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. And with all of that stuff, do you have much time, I guess, for hobbies outside of all that? Like, things that you really, really enjoy doing that are maybe not linked to a job or linked to money?
I work a lot. I'm often working on Saturdays. I can see not having to do that soon, which is nice. Hobby wise, it's been hard during lockdown, if I'm honest, because life just blends in.
Yeah. So you're in Melbourne. So for those who don't know, that currently is the most lockdown city in terms of days in the world. So
yes, we've been locked down for a very long time. So weekends blur into weekdays, and I find that, like, honestly, if we weren't in lockdown, I wouldn't be doing this stuff. I would actually have free time. So it's two things really. One, socializing. Like, I really enjoy catching up with friends, walking, dinners, having people over for drinks. I think entertaining is something I really enjoy. And the other is I have, how many I have at the moment? I have about 8 or 9 bonsai. That's about all I can fit in. So yeah, I mean, that gives me seasonal stuff to do. Winter, there's generally nothing but planning. Spring is like the busiest time. So like, I went and repotted every single plant that I have at the moment, but I couldn't do it, which was annoying. I had to get a guy who owns a nursery to do it because I couldn't buy the material that I needed, because he didn't have it in stock, or like you can't get it anywhere. Like, it's rare stuff to come about. So I paid for him to do it. Now they're all done. I'm just sitting there just like picking at them each day. And they're sort of my two hobbies, is like catching up with people and bonsai for sure.
Yeah, it is a funny little digression. I was into bonsai, like the idea of bonsai back in, I was still playing soccer, so I must have been 18, 19, something like that. And I went to like a little bonsai place after one of my games, which was how I originally thought of it. And I was like, oh, you can actually buy these things, super cool. Went there, and the dude, when he started explaining it to me, made me realize just how much energy and effort and care you need to put into them, and it scared me the hell off. And I went, oh no, I'm not ready for this. I'm not ready for this level of investment.
Yeah, right. Yeah, look, you know who kicked it off for me? I've been saying it for years, and then my mum bought me like a nice bonsai, like a $200 bonsai for a Christmas gift in like 2019, maybe. Yeah, I think it was 2019. And so I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to really like pay attention to this. And so I just made sure that this thing didn't die for 6 to 9 months. Luckily, she got me a species that does well. And I just thought, okay, how do I go about this? I found a guy who owns a nursery on the peninsula that is really underpriced. And I basically just bought up a shit ton of stock, like just things that I liked, and went from there. Yeah. And, now I've got stuff it's worth a lot of money, man. Like there's no doubt about that this stuff gets really expensive, but you can buy stuff that's cheap, do it up, let it grow out for a year, and then get it revalued. And you start to look at something that's, pretty nice.
Yeah. Nice. That's funny. So getting to that, I wanted to ask, I suppose, is there any thoughts in your head about potentially not having the time to do the things you love, or things that really capture your attention? So in particular, you said you've got a A-type personality. You really like to go hard at things and sort of, see the stepping stone, get onto the next one and whatnot. And I'm wondering, like, do you worry that you'll ever box yourself into a corner by having too much stuff, and then you think like, oh man, I'd really love to do learning another language, for example. I know you're interested in linguistics and things like that.
Yeah.
Are you worried about boxing yourself into a corner by doing too much stuff in a way?
I mean, always. It's just something that I have dealt with anxiety that comes from being an A-type individual. I've seen psychologists. I take medication now to help take the edge off. This is something that I'm always aware of. So I have certain things that I do to make life easier, but I also realize that there are just elements of my nature that will draw me into that sort of stuff. And so I have to have structured, regimented things that allow me to counteract that. The biggest issue I have is counteracting my nervous system getting frazzled. So what can I do? I can exercise, I can sleep better, I can meditate, and I can socialize, outside of a work environment. So long as I'm doing those 4 things at least once a day, then I'm genuinely okay. It's been harder during lockdown because that base layer anxiety is a little bit harder because everything meshes into one. You and your partner getting sick of each other because all you do is see each other. You don't see any friends. Exercising is way harder. So, it's just something that I always have to deal with in my life, and I've come to accept. It took me years to accept it, but I finally accept it.
Yeah. And so would you say that's linked to like a deep-seated fear or anything, or do you think that's more on just a nervous system level?
I think it's just a personality trait, to be honest. Yeah. Like, I don't think it's anything else. It's something I get from my dad. It's as simple as that. I've tried to overanalyze it. It doesn't really help me solve the problem because whether it came from my dad or whether it's part of me or whether it's something you pick up over life, like I can't change it. Like it's just who I am. So, yeah. And I genuinely believe that. I think your temperament is defined by your personality trait. And yeah, you should just accept it and realize what you should and shouldn't do. It's not easy when I get into the business that I'm in. Like the talent side of things, like you're always having to be available. It's an industry that doesn't like a lot of sleep, but I sleep a lot. I sleep 8 to 9 hours at least every day, or at least my average is above 8 hours, like 8 hours and 13 minutes, I think it is at the moment. So long as I hit that, I'm okay.
Yeah. I'm always really interested in how fear and anxiety match together, because in my personal life, like I've had 2 real big ones, which were just deep-seated fears. And I think they all link to something even deeper. You can always play the going deeper game with this sort of stuff. But for me, it was talking to women when I was younger. So this was sort of going through puberty, and then traveling overseas and not being able to speak the language, sort of almost both of those, I think, sort of linked to rejection and being the outcast.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, that mirrors my life. I mean, there was definitely a period of time where I was always an outcast. Yeah. I don't think I've ever been part of a popular group per se at school. And yeah, there's a long period of my life. I don't know what it is. I think because I'm naturally like my love language, but the thing that I want as an extrovert is affection, whether it's physical, verbal, whatever it may be. Like that's just something that I'm always going to seek out. So the people that gave me that were always the ones that I was closest with. So there's definitely an element of that goes into it, and it makes you want to be liked by people and be more extroverted and be more outgoing and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, I definitely think that's a part of it. But I also think that you can't change about yourself. It's just who you are. Like again, it all comes back to your personality traits. And so yeah, I don't try and overanalyze it too much.
Yeah. Do you think that A-type personality helps with fears, like in being able to identify it and then really attack it? Or is that something that's almost like each individual needs to figure out their own ways of how they go about those sorts of things?
Depends on what the fear is. Like you can be extroverted, but I think being like your level of agreeableness determines it'll really determine like how likely you are to attack something head on. Like I'm a disagreeable I'm a disagreeable person. If someone comes after me or I'm very opinionated, so I don't have any issues with holding myself. But I found just as an A-type individual, for some reason, my issue with anxiety just actually it accelerated everything. So it just made it worse. And I do wonder if I was a more chilled out individual, would that not have happened? And I think that is the case. Like, I think it can be, like my psych has told me many a times, like being who you are is a double-edged sword. You know, you're driven, you get things done, you achieve stuff, but it can also burn you out completely. You can get you past the point of burnout, but that's the thing about being an A-type, is you don't realize you're burnt out until you well and truly are. Because you have that wherewithal within you to get past those moments. And the issue with that is, yeah, you might achieve something, but, you know, you can give yourself a heart attack, or you can be overtired, or whatever it may be, or you can, you know, not spend as much time as you should on giving yourself time to chill out. Like, all those things have a negative effect. So I think the biggest thing I learned dealing with the psych was, like, none of us are perfect. We're all battling with this sort of yin and yang feature of our lives. And so it's just something that you always have to deal with.
Definitely. Is there such thing as a B type? What's the opposite of an A type?
I don't know. Honestly, I couldn't tell you.
Could be just one of those ways, you know, just a way to describe a certain set of traits. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there's an opposite, like, the opposite of an A type is not a B type. It's, you know, like it is for introversion and extroversion. I don't know.
It's a good question. I've never, like, I'm sure I've looked it up. B type personality. It exists apparently.
Probably just bring up like bananas and pajamas or something.
Yeah. Apparently, like, you know, common B type personality is someone who's chilled out, relaxed. And, you know, when I look at my partner and I, like, that was the big thing that came out of, like, when we did our vows and our wedding, is, as individuals, we have very different people and we complement elements. You know, there's elements of our personality that complement each other. And so she makes me more relaxed. Her family and her definitely help me smell the roses a bit more. There are things that I could never date someone like myself. I could never date a woman who was like me, who was ultra driven, intense. Like, I just could not do it because it would piss me off, because they're just too like me. I think I would clash with that sort of person. So, I think it seems like there is a B type. Apparently, there's a C type and a D type. So I don't know.
God, it's getting too difficult.
Yeah,
we've already talked about books, but I wanted to, because you do read a lot. What have been, I suppose, the best books and best is however you want to describe it, that you've read, and preferably not something you're reading right now?
Okay. That's always really hard because, like, you know, you read a book and it's always front of mind, but Homo Sapiens is one. Have you read Homo Sapiens?
Are you talking about Sapiens by?
So Sapiens is Homo Sapiens, Brief History of Human Time by Yuval Noah Harari.
Yeah, no. Funnily enough, I read that once. I started reading that once. I really hated the first chapter and then, like, threw it out. So I basically didn't read it. But then since then, it's been like everyone who I watch recommends it as a fantastic book. You know, Sam Harris, Tim Ferriss, the list goes on and on. One did a book review of it just the other day. So I have not read that. No. It's
great book. The Undoing Project was that gateway drug book to thinking fast and slow. So that's by Michael Lewis, who wrote things like The Big Short. Tells you about the life of Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky, who basically created an area known as behavioral economics, which is sort of like economics plus cognitive biases. Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely is always a really, really good one. What else? I've got this whole list here. Like, I dot points my books and I put them into a Evernote sheet that I'm, like, literally looking at right now. You know, Public Relations by anything by Edward Bernays was super informative about, like, you know, about propaganda, influence, and all that sort of stuff. Like, he was the guy that really define this as a specialty, as an area. It's called, like, he's got another book called PR, which is called Public Relations. But yeah, that was an interesting one. And then I feel like that's what I'd recommend to anyone listening. I mean, there's more specific stuff where you get into like the business of running an agency. Like I read one book recently, like maybe a year ago, called Financial Management of a Marketing Firm. It's like one of the best fucking books I ever read, because it just told me everything I need to be aware of as an agency owner that I've been thinking about for so long, and it changed my perspective on everything in the business. And
yeah, that's definitely a specific book.
Very specific book. So, I wouldn't recommend people go reading it unless they run an agency, but Sapiens and those other ones I mentioned earlier are always good.
How about influential ones in the sense that they've really affected your life physically in many ways? So just for example, one of the reasons I went traveling through South America was because I read a book called A Dead Bat in Paraguay when I was 15 years old. And that just sunk in my mind for 10 years until I actually finally started traveling. So there's a couple of books like that where I can see like, yeah, that had a huge influence on stuff that I did for, 14 months of my life while I was traveling.
I don't want to sound like full of myself, but I feel like biographies were the one that really like gave me an understanding of who I was as an individual. Like I don't look at those people and go, okay, I'm like Benjamin Franklin, but you look at them and go, okay, they were just ordinary people doing things that were either exceptional or interesting. And so for me, when I read a lot of those biographies, everything felt possible. Like my mindset around things would change. Like I've read self-help books. I would say the most impactful book on my life that really kicked things off for reading was the 4-Hour Workweek. Like that, it's like Tim Ferriss just opened everything up. Now, the way that I found him was, he introduced me to him actually. No, I've got this mixed up. No, he really taught me, and I've completely grown out of Tim Ferriss stuff. I can't stand his shit anymore. His podcast interviews, books, they're all the same. But that's fine because everyone needs a book or a person in a certain stage in their life. But for me, like I was 21, 22, and it just changed everything. It just made me realize that anything was possible if I put my mind to it. And so long as I planned things out, I successfully broke a task down. Even just the fact of like reading, I never read shit until up to like reading the 4-Hour Workweek, because I was at uni. I was like, fuck this, man. Is this the rest of my life? And then I read his book. I'm like, okay, maybe there's a different way of doing things. And, you just learn stuff from that. And so if there's one pivotal book, I'd say that. And then I'd say Sapiens was a big one in terms of my perspective of my place in the world. And that it basically made me realize, like, honestly, like we're just here to eat shit and breed. And there is no purpose other than what you make it. So, it's up to you as an individual to really define that.
Yeah, nice. All right. I think that's a perfect place to end it off. Thanks so much for joining, Jordan. If people want to listen to the podcast, where do you want to direct people?
They can find us Uncommon Podcast, Uncommon_show, I think it is, on Instagram. I don't know if you do show notes, but, search Uncommon Show Podcast. They'll find it on Google.
I'll put some links in. Yeah.
Instagram. We just started our TikTok, and you'll find me from there.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you so much, man.